We meet at a local pub for a few drinks, and the plan is straightforward. Casual conversation, maybe some laughs, and chicken fingers because, well, who doesn't like chicken fingers? From the start, though, it's clear that the conversation is terrible. She's polite enough, but the banter is going nowhere. I'm doing my best to steer it into something resembling fun, but I might as well be talking to a wall. It's not awkward silence, it's worse. It's like filling out a questionnaire where every answer is fine or okay. Still, my attention shifts when I notice something odd. She's not eating the chicken fingers. Instead, she's systematically ripping them apart with her fingers, crumbling the breading into smaller pieces. Then, with deliberate precision, she's shoveling the crumbs into her massive purse. At first, I think maybe it's a nervous tic or some strange way of dealing with bad conversation, but eventually, I can't take it anymore. I call her out on it, trying to sound more curious than accusatory. "What's going on with the chicken fingers?" I ask, tilting my head toward the growing pile of crumbs in her bag. She beams at me, delighted I asked, and says, "Oh, I'm just feeding Sammy." Then, as if this is the most natural thing in the world, she reaches into her purse and pulls out a chinchilla. Not just any chinchilla. This one's plump and regal looking, like it's accustomed to finer things in life. She plops the little guy right onto the table, where he sits like a tiny emperor surveying his domain. I'm too stunned to say much at first. The sheer absurdity of it is overwhelming. But once I recover, I do what any sane person would do. I reach out to pet Sammy. He's surprisingly soft, like petting a cloud. Sammy seems cool with it, but his owner? Not so much. She gives me a sharp look and scoops him back into the purse. He doesn't like strangers, she says, which feels ironic since she just introduced him to a whole pub. Sammy disappears back into her cavernous bag, and we carry on with what's left of the evening. At this point, I'm ready to wrap things up. The night has taken a turn for the surreal, and I'm not entirely sure I want to know what's next. But then she casually mentions she could go for some ice cream. Despite everything, ice cream sounds like a good idea, so I agree. We head over to Ben and Jerry's, and for a brief moment, I think maybe this date can still turn around. We're sitting there, licking our cones, and the topic of tattoos and piercings comes up. It starts innocently enough. She asks if I have any, and I say no, but I've thought about it. Then she tells me she has nipple piercings. I nod politely, unsure how to respond. Before I can muster a follow-up question, she yanks down her shirt, right there in the middle of Ben and Jerry's at 8 p.m., and shows me. For a split second, I'm frozen, caught between shock and some kind of primal instinct to maintain composure. The people around us don't seem to notice, which is honestly baffling. Maybe they're just pretending not to see. Either way, I poke her face through the whole thing, mutter something neutral like, "Oh, okay," and silently pray for the ground to swallow me whole. When it's finally time to leave, I decide to walk her to her car. I figure it's the gentlemanly thing to do, and at the very least, it's an exit strategy. As we reach her car, she suddenly lunges at me for a kiss. Lunge might be the wrong word, it's more of a kiss attack. And well, she's cute in a way, so I go along with it, even though it's clumsy and weird. Her lips are tense, like she's holding back, and at one point, she licks my teeth. Yes, my actual teeth. I don't know what to make of it. For reasons I still don't fully understand, I friend her on Facebook after that. Maybe it was morbid curiosity, or a need to see if this was just her version of a quirky first impression. That's when I discovered Sammy had his own Facebook page. Not only that, but Sammy's page had significantly more friends than I did. Hundreds of them. People posted on his wall like he was a beloved local celebrity. A few months later, I see a post announcing Sammy's passing. His page is transformed into a memorial, and the tributes pour in. Dozens of people, around 35 at last count, leave heartfelt comments about how much they'll miss him. Some share memories of Sammy, which strikes me as odd since he spent most of his life in her purse. Against my better judgment, I click like on one of her statuses. It seems like a small, harmless gesture. Big mistake. Within minutes, she's calling me, sobbing uncontrollably about Sammy. I barely manage to get a word in as she pours out her grief. It's overwhelming, and I realize I'm in way over my head. As soon as the call ends, I unfriend her, though not Sammy's page. Something about that felt too final, like I'd be dishonoring his memory. And that's it. That's the story of my strangest date. Somewhere out there, Sammy's Facebook page still exists, a tiny shrine to a chinchilla who brought people together in ways I'll never fully understand. R.I.P. Sammy. You were a real one. I met a girl on eHarmony. This was at least 7 years ago, back when online dating was still kind of the Wild West. People were just starting to get comfortable with the idea of meeting strangers off the internet, and the whole process felt a little sketchy, but also kind of exciting. So when I matched with this girl, let's call her Lisa, I figured why not. She seemed cute enough in her pictures, and her profile made her sound quirky but fun. I should have known better. The plan was simple. I'd pick her up at her dorm, and we'd grab coffee or something. Nice and casual. No pressure. But from the moment she climbed into my car, I could tell this wasn't going to be your typical first date. She barely said hi before launching into what can only be described as a monologue. And not the charming, wow, she's so interesting and cool kind. It was more like, wow, should I be worried for my safety? Her first order of business? Telling me we had to make a quick detour to Planned Parenthood. I blinked, trying to process what she'd just said. Why? I asked, already knowing I probably didn't want to know the answer. Oh, I need to pick up some morning after pills, she said casually, like she was asking me to stop by Walgreens for gum. I got super wasted last night and had a ton of unprotected sex. I tried to keep my face neutral, but internally, I was screaming. What do you even say to that? Congratulations? Good luck. I just mumbled something about how I hoped everything was okay and drove her there, because really, what else could I do at that point? I was already in the car, and we were halfway there before I could even process the situation. On the way, things somehow got even weirder. She started talking about how she was pro-ana. For those lucky enough not to know, that means she was pro-anorexia. She said it like it was an actual personality trait, like, oh, I'm a Capricorn, or, I love dogs. She went on and on about her lifestyle, how she only allowed herself to eat a handful of almonds and half a celery stick each day. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and made vague noises of acknowledgement while mentally mapping out the fastest route back to her dorm. Then she pivoted to another topic, weed. I've always wanted to try pot, she said, staring out the window like she was contemplating the mysteries of the universe. But I'm scared it'll give me the munchies. I almost laughed, but she was dead serious. She looked me right in the eye, expecting me to validate this deep-seated fear that one hit off a joint would unravel her entire almond and celery existence. I was tempted to tell her it might actually chill her out a bit, but I didn't feel like getting into a debate about the pros and cons of marijuana with someone who was actively starving herself. We finally pulled up to Planned Parenthood, and she hopped out without so much as a thank you. I waited awkwardly in the car, staring at the dashboard and trying to figure out how my night had taken this bizarre turn. At this point, I already knew there wasn't going to be a second date, but I figured I'd at least finish this one and get her home safely. She came back out about 15 minutes later, looking totally unbothered, like she hadn't just shared some deeply personal, and honestly kind of alarming, information with a guy she'd just met. She climbed back into the car, popped a mint into her mouth, and immediately started talking about how she'd always wanted a nose job, but was too scared of the anesthesia. I didn't even try to keep up with the conversation anymore. I just drove. When we finally got back to her dorm, she asked if I wanted to come inside for a bit. I think she could tell I wasn't super into the idea, but she pushed a little, saying, "Come on, I'll show you my collection of Japanese fashion magazines." I don't know why, but I almost said yes. Maybe I felt bad for her, or maybe I was just curious to see what other strange surprises she had in store. But in the end, I made up some excuse about having an early morning and left. That was the first and last time I ever saw her. I never messaged her again, and she never reached out to me either. It was like we both silently agreed that whatever had just happened didn't need to be revisited. For a while, I thought about the whole thing like it was just another bad date story, something to tell friends at parties when the topic came up. But every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering what happened to her. Did she ever try weed? Did she get over the munchies fear? Did she stick with the pro-ana thing? And then one day, I was scrolling through Facebook, because of course I'd friend her for some reason, and I saw her pop up in my feed. She looked different. Healthier, I think. She dyed her hair pink and was posting pictures of vegan smoothie bowls. She'd apparently joined a yoga cult and was trying to sell homemade crystal-infused water bottles. I didn't message her. I just kept scrolling, quietly relieved that I hadn't gone inside her dorm that night. We've all had bad dates, right? This is the only date I've had to date that rang every alarm bell and waved every red flag. I'll preface this by saying I don't go on many dates, but when I do I make sure I follow safety protocol by only meeting my date in public places. Let either family or friends know where I'm going. and park in a populated place close by to wherever we meet. Anyway, this date initially suggested we meet at his house to watch a movie and have a few drinks, and I said no, I don't feel comfortable with that, and I only want to meet in public. He seemed okay with this, but then brought it up a few more times, and I said if money is an issue we could meet up another time or forget about it altogether. But my date backtracked and went with my idea of meeting at a cafe I chose, that I was familiar with and equidistant to where we both lived. Anyway, he turns up in a two-door car. This detail is relevant, and goes into the cafe, and I follow behind and introduce myself. After a polite introduction, things begin to get weird. I order a Coke, and he says, "Don't you want a drink?" I was going to pop into bar, which is connected to the cafe, and get one. I say no, I'm not drinking, and he looks at me like WTF, as if I'm being unreasonable. I already explained in messages, I don't drink as I'm on medication, so having to re-explain it again pissed me off. He seems disappointed, and goes to order a cider from the bar while I get a table. Anyway, we sit down with our drinks, and date immediately goes on about going back to his place again, even though the original plan was to stay here and order food, and I already stated that was not happening. He says something along the lines of having a few drinks and eating at his place, and I said we don't have to eat, we can just have our drinks and leave. He gets defensive and says he has money but prefers it if we go back to his. I make a joke and say, "You're not a killer, are you?" And instead of laughing it off, he stares at me uncannily and says, "You don't think I would hurt you, do you?" I laugh uncomfortably and say of course not, but really I'm relieved this date won't be going any further. Date suddenly says, "Are you going to follow me in your car? Because that wouldn't make sense. How about we go in my car, but I've got packages in the front, so you'll have to squeeze in the back, and I'll drop you back off to your car after." In reality, that made less sense than me following him in my own car and then driving home from this house after. The fact it was completely illogical made it even more creepy in my mind. Every alarm bell was going off at this point. I said, "Look, I don't want to go to yours, and your insistence is giving me the creeps." Date looks shocked, mumbles something about needing the toilet, and excuses himself from the table. A few moments later, I see him through the cafe window getting into his car and driving off. Massive bullet dodged in my opinion. Also, the fact his car didn't have back doors made it even more sinister, because imagine if something happened in the car and I couldn't escape. Allow me to tell you the tale of when I went on a date with a Lovecraftian horror. A girl messaged me one night on OkCupid. The message was short and went something like, "Hey, you're cute, I love zombies too." I mentioned in my profile I'm a professional zombie actor. Text me XXXXXX. She looked decent in the one picture she had up, which really should have been a red flag. I texted her, and she wanted to set up a date for the following Monday, January 3rd, 2011. Fast forward to that night, and I'm driving to pick her up, because she said she didn't have a car or a job. Red flag too. When my GPS led me to an empty grassy field, I called her and she told me to wait in the lot of the nearby Panera Bread. I waited a few minutes, and after a bit I see a figure emerge from the treeline at the back of the field. I could see it was my date. Her hair was black and greasy in front of her face. She wore this billowy fishnet thing that kind of hid her figure, but the worst part was her lazy eye that just lolled and rolled about in her socket, and would settle and stare just several inches away from my face, so it seemed like she was staring at an invisible horn growing out the side of my head. I should have fled, but I was too much of a nice person, and if this bogwitch wanted to go on a date, then by golly I'll do it. We go inside, and I immediately discover I have a pet peeve for people who talk several decibels higher than everyone else. I grab us a booth in the far corner, so she doesn't end up shouting our entire conversation. I say to her, "So tell me about yourself," which was probably the worst possible question for me to ask. She begins with talking about how she's not like other girls. She can pull off the goth/emo/punk look all at once. That most of her friends are furries, and they'd love to meet me. She's looking for a very obedient sub. She enjoys watching tranny threesomes, and she loves foot torture. Now this was definitely the third red flag, but at this point I made my bed, and I'm sleeping in it. She asks me about myself, and I go on about my very normal hobbies and interests, and she's fighting me all along the way, telling me that airsoft promotes gun violence, and that I'll never go anywhere with a degree in graphic design. I did, thanks. She cuts me off and asks me to talk about any female friends I have. I begin to describe a few when she keeps jutting in with, "Well, she sounds like a bitch, and I don't think she likes you." I stop and ask her if she has a problem, and she drops this line, "I need to eliminate all competition if I'm going to have a chance with you." Oh no. There's a long pause as I eat my food, but she eventually breaks the silence with asking me, "Do you know what really breaks the ice?" Getting intimate. Want to hear a personal story? What wasn't personal already? She goes on about some past relationship and how good it was and everything seemed fine until it ended with, "And then he gave me herpes." Now that's all the fucking red flags. I stand up, tell her it was nice meeting her, but I have to leave. She follows me out and gets in my car with me. Of all the times I left the doors unlocked. She demands I drive her home. She tells me to pull up into the grassy field, which had a dirt road I couldn't see earlier. The dirt road goes into the woods, and I expected it to come out upon a clearing with a dilapidated shack, and a fire pit with animal bones, and a bog which she'll walk into and sink back to the depths from where she came. But no, it came out to a rather nice-looking house. But then she drops the line, "Yeah, I've been living here for the past 2 weeks with a guy I found on Craigslist." I pull up, she tries to kiss me, I push her back, tell her to get out of my car, and I drive away. I still remember her silhouette waving to me in my rearview mirror. I sped home, took a shower, acid-washed my face, burned my clothes, and cried myself to sleep till Sunday morning. Remember, it was a Monday. A lot more has happened since that day, but this was the initial date. This date gone wrong had become a bit of a legend amongst my friends, and I usually end up telling it at every party. I was living in Austin at the time, which already sets the scene for some weird encounters, but this one still sticks out. I had 420 friendly listed on my dating profile, a rookie mistake in hindsight. Back then, I thought it was just a chill way to let people know I was laid back and open-minded. Turns out, it was also a beacon for every stoner within a 10-mile radius who was more interested in scoring free weed than actually dating. So I matched with this girl, we'll call her Megan. She seemed cool enough in her profile pics. Artsy tattoos, kind of a punk vibe, and she listed her interests as live music, thrift shopping, and existential conversations. Honestly, it sounded promising, so we exchanged a few messages, and she suggested we meet for coffee. We picked this little indie coffee shop downtown, the kind of place with mismatched furniture and baristas who look like they're judging your music taste. I showed up a couple minutes early and grabbed a corner table, figuring we'd sit down, get to know each other, and see where things went. She showed up about 10 minutes late, but I didn't mind. She looked more or less like her pictures, blue hair, septum piercing Doc Martens. She gave me a quick hey, sat down, and immediately asked, "So, did you bring any?" I blinked. "Any what?" "Weed." She leaned in like it was some big secret, despite the fact that we were sitting in a coffee shop that smelled like espresso and patchouli. Now I did in fact have some on me because, Austin. I didn't think we'd be diving into it within the first 30 seconds of meeting, but I went along with it. "Yeah, I've got some," I said. She grinned and stood up. "Cool. Let's go smoke." So we leave the coffee shop before even ordering anything and head out back to this little alleyway behind the building. It's not exactly scenic, dumpsters, graffiti, a couple pigeons, but she doesn't seem to care. I pack a bowl, and we pass it back and forth a few times. At first, I try to make small talk. The usual first date stuff, work, hobbies, music. But she keeps giving these short, vague answers, like she's not really listening. I start to get the sense that her main reason for meeting up wasn't to get to know me. About 10 minutes in, she pulls out her phone, checks the time, and suddenly goes, "Oh crap. I just remembered I have to go to work in half an hour." I pause, trying to process. "Wait, what?" "Yeah, totally forgot." She hands the bowl back to me, slings her bag over her shoulder, and says, "Thanks for the smoke. Bye." And just like that, she's gone. I stood there for a minute, still holding the bowl, wondering what the hell just happened. Did I just get used for free weed? Was this her plan all along? Or was she genuinely that bad at managing her schedule? Honestly, it didn't even matter at that point. I just laughed, finished the bowl by myself, and went back inside to actually get some coffee. We never spoke again. No follow-up text, no awkward, "Hey, we should do this again sometime." Nothing. I did check her profile later out of curiosity, and she'd updated it to say she was only looking for friends. I'm guessing I wasn't the only guy who had an experience like that. Looking back, it's funny now, but at the time, it was one of those moments where you just kind of sit there questioning your life choices. Like, why did I think putting 420 friendly in my profile was a good idea? Why didn't I ask more questions before meeting up? And most importantly, why did I agree to smoke behind a coffee shop with someone I'd known for less than 5 minutes? Years ago, back when Match.com was still the go-to for online dating, and people were just starting to trust that meeting strangers from the internet wasn't a guaranteed way to get murdered, I decided to give it a shot. I was single, bored, and optimistic, or maybe just naive. Either way, I matched with this guy who seemed decent enough over email. He was polite, spelled words correctly, low bar I know, and didn't immediately launch into any weird conversations about feet or aliens or what I was wearing. So against my better judgment, I agreed to meet him. The plan? A movie date. Simple, low pressure, and most importantly, public. I even offered to pay for my own ticket, because I didn't want to feel obligated to stick around if things went sideways. And spoiler alert, they did. I drove 45 minutes to meet him, which already felt like a small gamble. He was there waiting for me, and as soon as I saw him in person, I felt this weird little pang in my gut. You know that feeling when something just feels off? Yeah, that. He had this nervous energy about him, and his eyes were unsettling. It wasn't anything obvious, but they gave off strong, 27-year-old virgin who's creepily close to his mom vibes. I brushed it off though. I'd already come this far, so I figured I'd at least watch the movie and call it a night. We sat down, and almost immediately he put his hand on my leg. I moved it off, politely but firmly. He waited a beat, then put it right back. I moved it again. This time, he seemed to get the hint, for about 20 minutes. We sat in silence for a bit, watching Peter Jackson's King Kong, because nothing sets the mood like a giant CGI ape rampaging through New York. And for a second, I thought maybe it wasn't going to be a complete disaster. Then, round 3. This time, his hand didn't just land on my leg. Nope. It crept up to my inner thigh. Thank God I was wearing pants and not a skirt, or I might have set the theater on fire. Instead, I grabbed his hand, shoved it away, and told him in a whisper that if he touched me again, I'd get up and leave. He rolled his eyes and chuckled. Chuckled, like I was being dramatic or cute or just playing hard to get. Then, because apparently he was either the world's dumbest man or thought he was in some kind of rom-com, he put his hand back on my leg. That was it. I smacked his hand away, stood up, and stormed out of the theater without looking back. I didn't care about the movie. I didn't care that people were probably staring. I just wanted out. Of course, he followed me. What? What did I do? He actually sounded confused, which was almost impressive in its own way. Like he genuinely couldn't figure out why grabbing a woman repeatedly after she told him to stop might be a problem. I ignored him and kept walking, but he wasn't done. Halfway through the lobby, he grabbed my shoulder and tried to stop me. That's when I turned, leaned in, and told him, quietly, that if he didn't back off and stop following me, I'd make a scene. And if he tried to touch me again, I'd be calling the police. Did he listen? No, of course not. He grabbed my wrist. And that's when I screamed, loud enough to make the entire theater stop and stare. Get the fuck away from me. You know that moment in a movie where the music cuts out and everyone freezes? That's what it felt like. The whole lobby went dead silent, and suddenly, every pair of eyes was on us. I saw at least 3 big guys nearby stand up a little straighter, like they were already running through scenarios where they might have to body slam him into the popcorn machine. He let go of my wrist immediately and backed up, stammering something about how I was overreacting. Meanwhile, I turned on my heel and walked out without another word. I didn't look back, but I really hoped someone gave him a hard time after I left. You'd think that would be the end of it, right? Wrong. He emailed and texted me 10 times a day for the next month. No exaggeration. He started with apologies and let's talk about this messages, but when I didn't respond, it escalated to guilt-tripping and I just want closure nonsense. Eventually, it turned into outright anger. He even accused me of leading him on. I blocked him everywhere I could, reported him to Match, and finally stopped hearing from him after what felt like forever. To this day, I still can't sit through King Kong without feeling vaguely uncomfortable. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a good movie. But every time I see Naomi Watts getting dragged around by a giant ape, I think, same girl. Same. It was late, probably around midnight, and I was just about to crash for the night when my phone buzzed. It was a girl I'd hooked up with a couple of times before. Let's call her Amber. And she wasn't exactly subtle about why she was calling. She skipped all the small talk and jumped straight to the point. "What are you doing right now?" she asked in that slightly slurred, flirty voice that usually meant she was drunk and feeling bold. Now normally I might have been into it. She was cute, fun, and not someone who usually called out of the blue like this. But I was exhausted. I'd had a long day, and the idea of dragging myself out of bed to entertain someone, even for a guaranteed good time, just felt like too much effort. So I told her, maybe another time. She hung up pretty quickly, and I figured that was the end of it. Wrong. About 15 minutes later, my phone rings again. Same number. Same girl. This time, she's even less coherent, but she's also persistent. She says she's already on the way and asks if I can just let her in when she gets there. At this point, I'm sitting there thinking, do I really want to do this? But I also don't want to miss the opportunity, so I give in and say, fine. Big mistake. A few minutes later, I hear a knock at my door, and when I open it, Amber literally falls through the doorway. Like, face first into my apartment. She's completely blind drunk. Heels in one hand, purse in the other, hair a mess, and the first thing she does after hitting the floor is start taking her clothes off. Not in a sexy way either. More like she's trying to escape from a straitjacket. At this point, I should have just walked her back outside, called her an Uber, and washed my hands of the situation. But no, I decided to try to handle it. Big mistake number 2. She stumbles toward my couch, still half undressed, and before I can stop her, she vomits. Everywhere. And not just a little. I'm talking exorcist-level projectile vomiting. I freeze for a second, trying to process what just happened, and before I can even grab a towel or a trash can, she takes off running, well, stumbling, into my bedroom. I follow her, panicking because I already know what's coming next, and sure enough, she makes it about 2 feet into the room before vomiting again. But this time, it's all over my bed. Then, as if this night couldn't get any worse, she passes out. Naked. On my floor. Covered in her own puke. So there I am, standing in the doorway of my bedroom, staring at this half-naked, unconscious girl sprawled out on the carpet, and all I can think is, this is not how I thought my night was going to go. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning up the mess, alternating between scrubbing the couch cushions and stripping the bed while gagging the entire time. Meanwhile, Amber is just lying there, snoring like a chainsaw, completely oblivious to the disaster she's caused. By the time I finish cleaning, I'm so tired and frustrated that I just throw a blanket over her and crash on the floor in the living room. I sure as hell wasn't sleeping in my bed after what had just happened. The next morning, she wakes up and has no memory of the chaos she unleashed. She's all smiles and good morning, like we're about to go out for brunch or something. Meanwhile, I'm standing there with bloodshot eyes, holding a trash bag full of ruined sheets and wondering how this is my life. I tell her, politely but firmly, that she might want to check herself in the bathroom mirror before she leaves, and as soon as she realizes what she looks like and smells like, the panic sets in. She apologizes about 1,000 times and promises to Venmo me money for cleaning supplies. Spoiler alert, she never did. I drove her home later that morning with the windows down, because the smell of stale booze and puke was still lingering. We didn't talk much during the ride, and when I dropped her off, she just said, thanks, and disappeared into her apartment like nothing had happened. I never heard from her again. No texts. No calls. Nothing. And honestly, I was fine with that. I threw out the sheets and spent another few hours trying to salvage my couch, but it never really recovered. There was always this faint smell that wouldn't quite go away no matter how much Febreze I used. I ended up selling it on Craigslist a few months later. To this day, I wonder if the person who bought it ever noticed, or if they're sitting on it right now, completely unaware of the horror story that Couch had lived through. My online dating experience has always been fun, to say the least. I've went on dates with women of all cultures and experiences, and I've met some profoundly amazing people in my life from online dating. With that said, there is one instance of one truly crazy bitch that almost ended it all. Sort of a long story, but I'll try to cut it short. So I just got on with a new company, and was going to be traveling to another state on the company's dime. The company gave everyone a credit card that had a $52 limit per day. I also happened to get paid for my time down there, so you could say I had a healthy amount of play money. I knew as soon as I got there that my first prerogative was to get a companion to tag along with me, and I didn't want to fool around with my coworkers, so I opted to just pursue online dating. So I find this nice gal, a plus-sized model. She appeared from her profile description and pictures to be a fairly normal functioning member to society. Boy, how wrong I was. How terrifyingly wrong I was. So we make plans to go to a hookah bar and shoot the shit, so to speak. I'm staying in a hotel that my company was paying for. She rolls up in this beat-up Cadillac. Rust all over. I can only glance, but I think I see what are bullet holes in the side of her car. Bullet holes? What? Yes, there were actual bullet holes on the side of this piece of shit car. I tried not to think much of it. I was in a good mood and wasn't going to let this ruin my time. So I get in the car. Now you have to remember that this is later in the evening, around 9 p.m., so I don't have a full picture of who is in the car at the time. She immediately floors it and we're off. The street lights start to form around her face and, OMG, what is this thing in front of me? What appeared before me was not the woman I saw in a profile, but in fact, the devil incarnate. This wildebeest of a woman. This, unibrowed, omni-fat-rolled, Sasquatch was in control of our destination. I felt deceived and disgusted. She looked nothing like her profile picture. Nothing. And she stank to high hell to add insult to injury. The smell burned my nostrils like I literally felt like I was inhaling acid. It was rancid. I already knew this night was going to be a disaster, but I was already in knee deep at this point, so I persevered. I told myself that I was trying to make friends and have a good time. I was determined to just have a good night on the town. So here we are on the interstate, and this girl is driving like a madman. I'm gripping the seats with anticipation. She tells me she's high. Oh my God. She pulls out a brick of weed and starts laughing, saying how good of a time we're going to have tonight. Oh my God, I'm going to jail. I just got this corporate job, and I haven't even started, and I just know I'm going to jail. And behind us were fucking cops. Cops! I'm literally covered in sweat because she's driving like a psychopath, going well over 25 miles per hour the speed limit. She's loaded on drugs, and there's over a pound of dope in her car. Holy fucking shit, were those few moments tense for me. Somehow we get off the interstate. I'm alive. She starts blabbing on about how she's this super important person where she lives. How she's some sort of celebrity or whatever. How she was in a movie with Seth Green for 5 minutes in a cameo. No big deal, she would say a lot. No big deal. I think she was trying to impress me. I don't know, I couldn't listen because of how pissed I was. There wasn't much I could do at this point, so I just had to ride this out. So I asked her where she modeled at, and she told me. I asked if I could see some pictures. She says they burned up in a huge fire that took the business out. I asked if I could see her website of the photos. She says that the website was taken down due to some criminal activity with the photographers. I ask about the bullet holes on the side of the car. Why did she have them? She then proceeds to take me to this sketchy part of the city and tells me how she got them in a gang fight she was in with her brother. She then proceeds to show me her knife wound on her belly. I felt like passing out, and the date hadn't even started yet. So finally, after what felt like an eternity, we make it to the hookah bar. I start dialing frantically to get out of there, begging someone to pick me up. Nobody comes. Nobody picks up. I reluctantly pace back to the hookah bar. I needed to get out of there, so I lie and tell her that I left my wallet back at the hotel. She attempts to pay for me. No, I must insist. The gentleman always pays. And we leave. It's fucking working. I'm going to live. And then we arrive back at the hotel. I say I'll be back down in just a minute. She insists on coming up with me. I make up some bullshit excuse that only company employees are allowed in the hotel, and then I straight jet to my room and lock the door. I texted her and was like, yeah, I'm not going to be coming back down. She then proceeds to call my phone. Again, and again, and again, and again. She was PISSSSSEEDD. She sent me a text saying how she was going to wait outside the hotel and was going to stab me in the chest. A few minutes later she apologizes and just wanted some companionship for the night. Then she apologizes for lying about her pictures. Then threatened me again. I ended up calling the police and hiding in my room for the rest of the weekend. I never spoke to her again. On the plus side, I have a pretty ridiculous story to tell now. Before I met my current boyfriend, I went through a bit of a dating phase. You know, testing the waters, trying to see what was out there. Online dating seemed like a good idea at the time, low effort, lots of options. But, as it turns out, options can also mean lunatics. Case in point, this one guy I met on OkCupid. His profile seemed normal enough. He had nice pictures, clean-shaven, decent smile, seemed like he knew how to dress himself, and his messages were coherent, which honestly put him ahead of 70% of the competition. We talked for a bit, and he seemed charming, funny, and most importantly sane. So I figured, why not? What's the worst that could happen? Spoiler alert, a lot. We decided to meet up for dinner and a movie, which felt like a safe, classic date. Dinner was fine. Nothing special. I wouldn't say there were any sparks flying, but he was cute enough that I wanted to give it a chance. Then he started talking. The conversation took a sharp left turn when he decided to tell me all about his ex-fiancée. Now, a little past relationship talk isn't always a red flag, but this was a parade of red flags. Apparently, his ex was a dancer on a popular TV show back in the Philippines. Sounds impressive, right? Except she was also secretly married the entire time they were engaged. He went on and on about how betrayed he felt, how she manipulated him, and how he totally would have forgiven her if she'd just left her husband. I sat there, awkwardly pushing my salad around my plate, wondering why on earth he thought this was first date material. He finally wrapped up his tragic tale of heartbreak, and I thought, okay, maybe this is just a weird overshare. We can move past it. We could not. We headed to the movie theater, and I was hoping for a reset, something to lighten the mood and maybe salvage the date. Nope. Instead, things went from uncomfortable to horrifying before the trailers even finished. We sat down, the lights dimmed, and I was just settling in when I noticed some weird movement out of the corner of my eye. I glanced over, and, I kid you not, this man had unzipped his pants and started jerking off. Right. In the theater. I froze, completely horrified. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe he was just adjusting himself or something. Nope. He was fully committed to what he was doing, and I was trapped next to him with no clue how to react. I leaned over, whispering, "What the hell are you doing? And do you know what this lunatic said?" He looked at me like I was the crazy one and replied, "What? Every normal person jerks off in movie theaters." What? I sat there, stunned, trying to process whether he was joking or if I had just gone on a date with an actual psychopath. Unfortunately, it was the latter. I immediately grabbed my purse and moved to the other side of the theater, leaving him to whatever the hell he was doing over there. I don't think I've ever walked faster, while simultaneously trying not to draw attention to myself. Meanwhile, he didn't even try to stop me. He just kept doing his thing, like this was the most natural behavior in the world. At that point, I didn't even care what he was up to. I was just trying to salvage what was left of the evening because, honestly, I really wanted to see the movie. And I did. I sat all the way on the other side of the theater and enjoyed the hell out of it. It was a fantastic movie, by the way. Definitely didn't deserve to be associated with that level of weirdness. After the credits rolled, I waited until I was absolutely sure he'd left before I walked out of the theater. I didn't want to risk him following me to my car and trying to make small talk like nothing had happened. But oh no, the story doesn't end there. I thought that would be the last I ever heard from him, but nope. This guy actually had the nerve to text me later that night and ask if I wanted to hang out again. I didn't even respond. I just blocked his number, deleted his profile, and spent the next few days wondering how I managed to attract the kind of person who thinks public masturbation during movie trailers is socially acceptable behavior. So, I matched with this 20-year-old girl who we'll call Megan. She seemed cool enough, cute, into music, didn't have any pictures of herself posing with tigers or flexing in gym mirrors. We messaged back and forth for a few days, and everything seemed pretty normal. No red flags, no weird vibes. Eventually, she asks if I want to hang out that weekend. I say sure, and she gives me her address so I can pick her up. Pretty standard so far. Except there's one tiny issue. I only knew her screen name. Her profile name was something like x0_cutie_420_xx, and we'd never exchanged real names. I didn't even notice at first because most conversations online just kind of roll forward without anyone stopping to introduce themselves like it's a job interview. But on the way over to her house, I suddenly realize I'm about to knock on a stranger's door, ask for their daughter, and I have no idea what her actual name is. I figure it's not too late to fix this, so I send her a quick text. "Hey, by the way, what's your real name?" No response. Okay, maybe she's getting ready or her phone's in another room. No big deal. I keep driving. But as I get closer, it starts to sink in. This is kind of weird, right? I'm a 6 feet 3 inches guy with a goatee showing up unannounced. And all I have is an address and a username that sounds like it belongs to a teenager's AIM profile from 2006. Still, for some reason, I keep going. I pull up to the house, walk up to the door, and knock. And this is where the universe decides to really crank up the awkwardness. The door opens, and it's her mom. Not Megan. Not a roommate. Not even a younger sibling. Her mom. She looks at me like I've just asked if I can bury a body in her backyard, and I'm immediately drowning in panic. She gives me the most polite yet suspicious, "Hi, can I help you?" And I just freeze. What am I supposed to say? "Oh, hi, I'm here to pick up your daughter, but I actually don't know her name because we met online, and I trusted this entire interaction to work itself out without doing any basic prep work." I'm staring at this poor woman, silently panicking, while she's standing there waiting for me to speak. It's maybe 5 seconds, but it feels like an eternity. Finally, I go with what is arguably the worst line ever. "Hi, I'm here to see, She cocks her head, clearly wondering if I've sustained some kind of brain injury. Then, by some divine intervention, she says, "Megan?" I nearly pass out from relief. "Yeah, Megan. Sorry about that." She gives me a look like she's 90% sure I'm high, but decides to let me in anyway. I'm guessing she figured anyone this awkward couldn't possibly be dangerous. Or maybe she just wanted me off her porch before the neighbors saw. Megan comes downstairs, and at first, I think maybe we can salvage this. She's cute, like her pictures, and she doesn't seem fazed by the fact that her mom just had to guess her name for me. But then we actually start hanging out, and it's downhill from there. Dinner was awkward. Megan didn't talk much, and when she did, it was mostly about how much she missed her ex-boyfriend, but was totally over him now. I don't know if she was trying to convince me or herself, but either way, it wasn't working. The conversation got so bad that I started pretending to care about the restaurant's decor, just to fill the silence. Wow, they really went for the whole rustic industrial vibe, huh? That's where we were by the end of the appetizer. But the real cherry on top, the movie. We thought it'd be safer than trying to talk, but instead, she spent the entire movie texting. Not even sneakily. Full-blown, screen on bright, phone in hand texting. At one point, she even leaned over and asked me if I had a charger. I didn't. And even if I did, I probably wouldn't have given it to her out of principle. By the end of the night, it was pretty clear neither of us had any interest in seeing each other again. I dropped her off, said, "Take care," and drove home feeling like I'd just survived some kind of social experiment designed to test the limits of human discomfort. The next morning, I woke up to a friend request from Megan's mom. I didn't accept it. Epilogue, I never heard from Megan again, and honestly, I wasn't upset about it, but every time I think back to that moment at the door, I can still feel the panic flooding back. Lesson learned, next time, always get the real name. Matt was older, early 30s, and seemed like he had his life together. He had a decent job, his own place, and unlike the guys my age, he didn't consider frozen pizza and Red Bull a balanced meal. He also had a kid, which, looking back, probably should have been my first sign that we were in very different places in life. But at 21, I saw it as proof that he was responsible and mature. Spoiler alert, he wasn't. We'd been talking for a couple of weeks before he invited me over to his house for dinner. He told me he was going to cook, which seemed charming. Like, who doesn't love a guy who can make a decent meal? So I agreed. I showed up at his house, and the first thing I noticed was that it was too clean. Not in a wow, he's neat kind of way, but in a serial killer trying to hide evidence kind of way. There was no clutter, no toys, no dishes, nothing personal, just this weirdly sterile vibe. I chalked it up to him being a neat freak and moved on. Dinner was fine. Nothing spectacular, but it wasn't terrible either. He made spaghetti and garlic bread, which was safe and unoriginal, but hey, I appreciated the effort. We talked about work, hobbies, and random stuff, and the conversation was mostly normal. The only hiccup was when he started talking about his ex-wife and got this weird, bitter look on his face. But I figured that was just leftover baggage and didn't think much of it. The real weirdness started after dinner. His son, let's call him Eli, was about 6 years old and had been quietly hanging out in his room while we ate. After dinner, he came out and asked me to play with him. I thought it was sweet. I mean, what kind of monster says no to a cute little kid? So we're playing this pretend game where he's the bad guy and I'm the prisoner. Totally harmless, right? That's what I thought too, until he pulls out an actual rope. I laughed at first because I assumed it was all part of the game, and maybe he'd just learned some tricks from summer camp or something. But then he started tying me to a chair, like full-on wrapping the rope around my arms and legs. At this point, I was nervously laughing and trying to play along while also thinking, this is getting kind of weird. I looked over at Matt, expecting him to step in and redirect the situation, but instead he just watched. Then Eli turned to his dad with this big, proud grin and said, "Look, Dad, I got her tied up for you." What? The actual hell? I froze. Matt just laughed and said, "Good job, buddy." Good job? Good job? I immediately started trying to wiggle out of the ropes, which, by the way, were surprisingly well tied for a 6-year-old. I don't know if this kid was taking Boy Scouts way too seriously or what, but it took me a solid minute to untangle myself while Matt just sat there smirking. Once I was free, I made up some excuse about needing to head home early. I don't even remember what I said, something about work or an early morning. Whatever it was, I grabbed my stuff and practically ran out the door. I spent the entire drive home replaying what had just happened and wondering if I had narrowly escaped some criminal mastermind family operation. Was this their thing? Did they lure unsuspecting girls into their house with spaghetti and garlic bread just to tie them up, and who even knows what next? The worst part is, Matt actually texted me the next day like nothing had happened. Had a great time last night. Eli really liked you. Want to come over again this weekend? Yeah, no. I didn't respond. Instead, I blocked his number and made a mental note to never date anyone with kids ever again. Not because of the kid. Eli was honestly kind of adorable in a creepy, horror movie sidekick sort of way, but because of the dad. This wasn't even a date. I was out at a bar with some friends, just having a good time. We'd had a couple of drinks, played some pool, and I was 100% not looking for romance that night. I wasn't even flirting with anyone, just existing. And apparently, that was enough to make me a target. I was standing near the bar, laughing at something one of my friends said, when this guy, who I had never seen before in my life, walked up behind me and, without a word, picked me up. Not like a cute, romantic, sweep you off your feet kind of pickup. No, this was a full-on caveman style, over-the-shoulder carry. At first, I thought maybe this was some kind of prank. Like maybe it was a friend of a friend being an idiot or someone trying to mess around. But as he started walking toward the door, it hit me that this guy was serious. I immediately started kicking and screaming. Put me down! What the hell are you doing? Help! And here's the truly insane part. No one did anything. Not the bartender, not the bouncer, not a single person in that bar so much as blinked. I could have been kidnapped in front of 30 witnesses, and their response was basically, "Oh, she's probably just drunk and being dramatic." I was not drunk. And I was definitely not dramatic. I was terrified. Meanwhile, this guy, let's call him Creepy McKidnapper, is just walking like nothing's wrong. Cool as a cucumber, heading for the door like he's carrying groceries and not a fully grown, screaming woman. At one point, I managed to elbow him in the ribs, but all it did was make him adjust his grip and keep going. I honestly don't know what his endgame was. Was he planning to take me outside and just hope no one noticed him shoving me into a car? Or was this his idea of a pickup line? Like, haha, isn't this quirky and fun? Don't you want to marry me and bear my children? Finally, one of my friends noticed. She'd gone to the bathroom and must have come out just in time to see me being hauled away, because the next thing I knew, she was grabbing his arm and screaming at him. What the hell are you doing? Put her down. I don't know if it was her yelling or the fact that someone finally called him out, but he dropped me like a sack of potatoes and bolted. And here's the kicker. Even after all that, no one in the bar reacted. Not the bartender, not the bouncer, no one. I was still shaking, trying to catch my breath, and all anyone around me did was look the other way. Like this was just some embarrassing scene that they wanted to pretend didn't happen. It blows my mind to this day. I mean, I get it, bystander effect and all that. People freeze. They assume someone else will step in, or they don't want to get involved, or they think it's not their business. But come on, a woman screaming for help while being carried out of a bar? That's everyone's business. My friend, bless her, dragged me back to our table, and we left shortly after because there was no way I was sticking around after that. The whole walk home, I kept replaying it in my head. How easily he picked me up, how casual he acted, and how no one gave a crap. And the worst part, I started second-guessing myself. Was I overreacting? Was he just drunk and trying to be funny? Was it really as scary as it felt in the moment? Spoiler alert, yes. I met this guy on Tinder, and we arranged to go on a date together after weeks of talking, getting to know each other. You know the drill. I told this guy I played the piano, and like half an hour later he said, if I wanted you to always remember me, I'd break your ring fingers. You know, 'cause they don't heal well, and then you'd always think of me when playing. It took me a second to process what he'd just said. We were sitting at this trendy little restaurant, the kind with Edison bulbs and rustic wooden tables, where the most alarming thing should have been a slightly overpriced cocktail. But there he was, casually dropping a line about permanently injuring me, as if he were flirting. I laughed nervously at first, hoping it was some awkward attempt at humor. But he didn't laugh. He just leaned back, smiling like he'd said something clever and deeply romantic. It was clear he thought this was the kind of thing that left an impression, and not the kind that would have me texting my friends SOS under the table. I tried to brush it off and change the subject, but the mood had already shifted. It didn't matter that the evening had started off fine. We'd talked about travel, music, and our favorite foods. He'd seemed charming, even complimented my dress, asked about my hobbies. But after that comment, all I could think about was how quickly I needed to get out of there. Excusing myself to the bathroom, I texted my best friend, "Help. Date is creepy. Call in 2 minutes with emergency." She delivered, of course, phoning in a fake crisis that required my immediate exit. When I returned to the table and explained, he looked mildly disappointed but didn't argue. He even said, "Hope I didn't scare you with that joke earlier. I was just trying to be memorable." Memorable? Definitely. In the same way a horror movie villain sticks with you. I paid my share of the bill, because I wasn't about to owe him anything, and left as quickly as possible. Sitting in my car afterward, I felt that mix of relief and disbelief, the kind where you can't stop replaying the moment in your head, wondering if it was as bad as it felt. Spoiler, it was. My group chat exploded when I relayed the story. Opinions ranged from, "What is wrong with him?" to "block him everywhere immediately," and I followed that advice. I reported him on the app too, though I wasn't entirely sure what category "threatened to break my fingers" fell under. In the following days, I kept replaying the encounter, analyzing every detail. Was he just socially awkward, trying too hard to be edgy? Or was that comment the tip of a much darker iceberg? Either way, I had no intention of finding out. The weirdest part, though, was how calculated it felt. He hadn't blurted it out in nervous excitement. He'd thought about it, framed it as something poetic, and delivered it like he expected me to swoon. It was less a slip-up and more a reveal of what, exactly, I didn't want to know. For a while, I felt weirdly paranoid about sharing too much with new people. It's strange how quickly one comment can shift your perspective, making you wonder if opening up about your interests is the same as giving someone a roadmap to hurt you. But I didn't stop playing piano. If anything, I played more, reclaiming it from the shadow of that conversation. Looking back, I'm grateful I listened to my gut. It's unsettling to imagine what might have happened if I'd ignored that instinct and stayed for dessert. Not every red flag comes in neon, and sometimes they arrive wrapped in charm and good first impressions. If there's any lesson here, it's this: trust your instincts. They're there for a reason. And if someone ever says they'd hurt you to make you remember them, don't stick around long enough to find out if they mean it. I thought dinner at Le Petit Bistro would be the perfect setting for a romantic evening. Candlelight, soft music, and the kind of menu where you pretend to know what half the ingredients are. It was supposed to be classy, a night to impress and feel impressed. But then Sarah pulled out the mustard packets. Not just one or two, she had a stash. She reached into her purse like she was digging for lipstick, and out came a fistful of tiny yellow packets. She arranged them on the table like she was laying out silverware, straightening each one until they formed a neat little row beside her plate. I tried to ignore it, thinking maybe she was joking. Maybe this was some cute, quirky bit she'd explain in a second. It wasn't. She caught me staring and said, "I just really like mustard," before tearing into the first packet with her teeth. She squeezed it onto her bread. No butter, no dipping oil, just mustard. I couldn't stop watching. The bread disappeared, followed by another packet, this time straight onto the appetizer. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't careful. It was aggressive. I tried to focus on the conversation, but my eyes kept drifting back to the packets. She was plowing through them like they were shots at a bar. The worst part? She looked so happy, completely oblivious to the fact that we were in a dimly lit, upscale French restaurant where the waiter refilled water glasses like it was performance art. People around us were sipping wine and murmuring about flavor profiles, and Sarah was over there turning fine dining into a picnic table at a baseball game. When the entrees came out, mine a perfectly braised coq au vin, and hers a delicate ratatouille, I prayed the mustard parade would stop. But Sarah had other plans. She popped open another packet and drizzled it over her plate like she was a Food Network star adding a signature garnish. She even offered me one. "Want some? It's Dijon. Fancy." She winked. I managed a tight smile and shook my head, trying to ignore the fact that the waiter had paused mid-step to watch the scene unfold. I was torn. Part of me wanted to laugh. The other part was mentally drafting an apology letter to the chef. By the time dessert arrived, I thought maybe we'd turned a corner. Surely, there were some foods that even Sarah wouldn't dare pair with mustard. But then came the tart tatin. I blinked as she opened yet another packet, this time drizzling the bright yellow sauce across the warm caramelized apples. She caught my expression and shrugged. What? It's sweet and savory. People love that combination. I finally leaned in, lowering my voice. Sarah, I get that you love mustard, but maybe we could. I don't know, take a break? Just this once. It's a little much. She looked at me, her brow furrowed. You think I'm weird, don't you? I hesitated. No, I think you're passionate. And passion is great. But this might be a bit intense. For the first time all night, Sarah looked unsure. She set down the packet and sighed. I just really like it. It makes everything taste better. But I don't want to embarrass you. I thought you'd get it. I reached across the table and took her hand. I do get it. And I don't want you to change. Maybe we can just save the mustard for places where they don't have linen napkins. She smiled, small but genuine. Deal. But you have to try it at home sometime. I'll convert you. I laughed, finally relaxing. We'll see about that. The rest of the night felt lighter. Sarah kept the mustard packets in her bag, and we finished dessert without any more condiment experiments. By the time we left, I was no longer thinking about what the waiter might have told the kitchen. Instead, I was focused on Sarah, her unapologetic enthusiasm, her confidence, and the way she made even the strangest habits seem kind of charming. Went out with a girl one night, and after dinner, she drove me up into the mountains. I was new to the area, so I thought it was kind of cool, romantic even. The city lights faded in the rearview mirror as we climbed higher, and I figured she was trying to show me something beautiful, maybe a lookout point or some secluded spot where we could sit and talk. But then, as the last streetlights disappeared, the vibe shifted. She started talking about serial killers. I thought she was joking at first. You know, one of those dark humor types who throws out morbid jokes just to see if you'll flinch. But the way she said it, calm, casual, like we were discussing favorite movies or weird childhood habits, made my stomach tighten. She leaned back in her seat, one hand on the wheel, the other gesturing in the dark. I used to think about getting away with stuff like that sometimes, she said. I laughed nervously, hoping it would lighten the mood. Oh yeah, like what? She didn't laugh. You know, disappearances. People vanishing without a trace. Stuff that makes the news but never gets solved. There's always a way if you're careful enough. If you plan it out. I swallowed hard and glanced out the window. Trees. Darkness. No signs of civilization. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't want to pull it out. Didn't want her to think I was calling for help or texting my location. I played it cool, leaned back, and tried to sound interested instead of terrified. So, what kind of stuff did you think about? Hypothetically. Her eyes flicked toward me, and for the first time all night, I realized I didn't really know this girl. Sure, we'd talked for weeks before this date. She seemed funny, smart, and just the right amount of sarcastic. But now, with nothing but darkness outside and no one else around, she felt like a stranger. Hypothetically, she said, I used to think about how you could make someone disappear in the woods. These kinds of roads, no cameras, no traffic. You could dig a hole out here, and no one would ever find it. The trick is knowing what not to leave behind. I nodded slowly, pretending to be fascinated instead of running through every possible escape plan in my head. That's interesting. You ever write that stuff down? Sounds like a movie plot. She smiled. Nah, just thoughts. We hit a bend in the road, and I spotted a clearing up ahead. Relief flooded me. Maybe this was just her idea of fun. Get the new guy freaked out, and then laugh about it later. But when she pulled over and killed the engine, the silence hit me like a punch. No hum of traffic. No distant city glow. Just the sound of crickets and the occasional rustle in the trees. She turned to me. You scared? I forced a laugh. No, should I be? Her smile lingered a second too long before she opened the door and stepped out. I followed, my legs feeling heavier than usual. She walked toward the edge of the clearing and looked out over the valley below. It was beautiful, sure, but all I could think about was how easy it would be for her to push me over the edge. I stayed a step behind, my heart pounding. So, is this where you bring all your dates? She laughed, finally breaking the tension. Only the interesting ones. Then she looked at me, and something in her eyes softened. Relax. I'm not a serial killer. I wanted to believe her, but part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this was still a test. I smiled and tried to look like someone who hadn't just spent the last 15 minutes wondering if he was about to be murdered. We stood there for a while, and slowly the fear started to fade. She pointed out constellations and told me stories about growing up in the area, camping trips, bonfires, and sneaking out at night to explore places just like this. Her voice softened, and I started to see the girl I thought I knew again. But every now and then, she'd say something that brought the tension right back. Like how you could use bleach to get rid of DNA, or how people don't always lock their doors in small towns. You'd be surprised what people don't notice, she said, her voice light but her words heavy. I kept smiling, kept playing along, but I was counting down the minutes until we were back on paved roads and within cell service range. When we finally headed back, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. She dropped me off at my place, gave me a quick kiss, and drove off like it was any other date. I stood there for a long time after she left, staring at the taillights disappearing down the street. She texted me later that night. Had fun. Let's do it again soon. I stared at the message, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to see her again. She was intriguing, funny, and if I was being honest, kind of thrilling. But another part of me kept hearing her voice, calm and steady, talking about making people disappear. I replied, yeah, had fun too. And then I sat there, wondering if that was the truth or just the easiest way to keep her from showing up at my door unannounced. Over the next few weeks, we kept texting, but I kept finding reasons to put off another date. Work got busy. Family stuff came up. Eventually, the messages stopped, and I felt a mix of relief and regret. Maybe not the creepiest thing ever, but definitely one of the grossest experiences I've had. So, I was hanging out with this guy I met through a mutual friend. He seemed decent enough at first, funny, laid back, and charming in that casual, boy-next-door kind of way. We decided to grab some ice cream, and then head back to his car to listen to music while we ate. Simple enough, right? Pretty low stakes. Or so I thought. We're sitting there in his car, both enjoying our ice cream cones and letting the music play softly in the background. It started out pretty chill. He was sharing his taste in music with me, talking about his favorite bands, and even played a couple of songs that I actually liked. At first, I thought, okay, this isn't so bad. Maybe this could turn into something. But then, things took a bit of a weird turn. As we sat there, he reached over and started playing with my hair, just gently rubbing my head and running his fingers through it. Now, I'll admit, I was a little taken aback. It wasn't like we were super close or anything, and I didn't know how to feel about it. I figured maybe he was just trying to be sweet, like some spontaneous attempt at being romantic. I tried to roll with it, even though I was already starting to get a slightly uncomfortable vibe. But what happened next? Oh boy, that's when things went from slightly awkward to downright cringeworthy. He gets to the bottom of his ice cream cone, the part with the chocolate inside, the best part, and pauses. I thought maybe he was savoring it, enjoying the last bite. But no. Instead, he looks at me dead serious and says, "This is your asshole." Yes, those exact words. I froze. My brain just stopped working for a second because, what? Did I hear that right? Surely, he didn't just say that. But before I could process what was happening, he sticks out his tongue and starts demonstrating what I can only assume he thought were his rimming skills. Right there, in his car, with his ice cream cone. And the worst part, he seemed so proud of himself, like he thought this was funny or even, God forbid, sexy. He even smirked at me, clearly expecting me to be impressed or maybe flattered by this little performance. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there, clutching my half-melted ice cream cone, trying not to let my face betray the horror I was feeling inside. I wanted to scream, or laugh, or cry. Honestly, I wasn't sure what the appropriate response was because the whole thing was just so bizarre. Instead, I forced out the most awkward laugh I've ever produced in my life and said something like, "Okay then," before quickly pivoting the conversation back to the music. But let me tell you, the vibe was completely shattered. There was no recovering from that. I couldn't look at him the same way after that little demonstration, and the more I replayed it in my head, the more uncomfortable I felt. I tried to finish my ice cream as fast as possible without making eye contact, all the while mentally plotting my exit strategy. After what felt like an eternity, I finally made up an excuse about having to get up early the next morning and said I needed to head home. He seemed a little disappointed, but thankfully he didn't push it. I thanked him for the ice cream, got out of the car, and practically sprinted to my own vehicle. The entire drive home, I kept replaying the scene in my head, alternating between cringing and laughing in disbelief. Who does that? Who looks at an ice cream cone and thinks, you know what this reminds me of? An anus. And you know what would be super hot? Licking it right now. Needless to say, we never hung out again. I avoided him at all costs, even going so far as to block his number, just to make sure he wouldn't try to reach out. I had a crazy chick do that once. Carve my initials into her thigh with a knife because she wanted to prove we were best friends. Spoiler alert, we weren't. Not even close. And to this day, I sometimes wonder if my name is still etched into her leg, a permanent scar from one of the most unsettling experiences of my life. It all started innocently enough. We were part of the same friend group, hung out a few times, and got along well enough in a casual, surface-level way. She seemed a little intense, sure, but I chalked it up to her just being one of those people who felt things deeply. I didn't think much of it until the day she dropped the knife. We were hanging out at her place, just killing time, when out of nowhere she started talking about how much our friendship meant to her. I nodded along, a little uncomfortable, but still trying to be polite. Then she said she wanted to do something to prove how much I meant to her. Before I could even ask what she meant, she grabbed a knife from her desk drawer, rolled up her jeans, and started carving. I froze. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing fast enough to react. She was carving my initials into her thigh, deliberately, slowly, like it was some kind of ritual. At first, I thought she was joking, but when the blood started to well up, the reality hit me. This was not a joke. This was something else entirely. I jumped up and tried to stop her, but she just looked at me with this wild, almost euphoric expression and said, "Now we're connected forever." I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the panic building in my chest, but she was so calm, eerily calm. I convinced her to let me clean up the cut, thinking that if I could just keep her from doing any more damage, maybe I could figure out what to do next. She let me help, but she kept talking about how this made us closer, like it was some kind of twisted bond. I was in full fight-or-flight mode, and the only thing keeping me from running out the door was the fear that she might hurt herself even worse if I left. Over the next few days, things escalated. She started showing up unannounced at my job, sending me long, rambling text messages about how much she loved me and needed me in her life. She'd talk about how no one else understood her the way I did, and how we were meant to be soulmates. I tried to set boundaries, but she ignored them completely. Then came the night I had to call the cops. She showed up at my apartment, pounding on the door and screaming that I had abandoned her. I could hear her crying and begging me to let her in, and when I didn't, she threatened to hurt herself if I didn't come outside. That was the breaking point. I called 911, explained the situation, and stayed on the phone with the dispatcher until the police arrived. Watching them take her away was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I knew she needed help, but I also knew I couldn't be the one to give it to her. After that night, I cut off all contact. I blocked her number, deleted her from social media, and told our mutual friends what had happened. Most of them were shocked, but a few admitted they'd always thought there was something off about her. I guess I just didn't see it until it was too late. Even now, 15 years later, I still think about her sometimes. I wonder if she ever got the help she needed, if she ever looked back on that time and realized how out of control she was. Went on a date with a man I met through a dating app. At first, he seemed charming enough, funny, well-spoken, and just the right amount of flirty to keep things interesting. But red flags started popping up almost immediately. For starters, he lied about his age. I'd been under the impression he was in his early 30s, but he was actually 10 years older than me, and freshly divorced, no less. I tried to keep an open mind. People sometimes misrepresent themselves online, right? Maybe he just wanted to make a good first impression. But as the night went on, it became painfully clear that this wasn't going to be the fun, laid-back evening I'd imagined. After a brief, awkward dinner where he overshared details about his divorce, including how his ex-wife didn't appreciate him enough, he suggested we go somewhere more exciting. I figured he meant a bar or maybe a live music spot. Nope. Instead, he insisted on taking me to a gentleman's club 30 minutes away. Now, I'll admit, I was caught off guard. Who takes a first date to a strip club? But he was so enthusiastic about it that I started to question if maybe I was the one being uptight. So against my better judgment, I agreed to go. Big mistake. The drive there was uncomfortable, to put it mildly. He kept calling me like a sister while stroking my leg, saying how awesome I was for being so cool about the whole thing. I tried to laugh it off, but internally I was screaming. Everything about the situation felt wrong. Once we got to the club, things went from bad to worse. He spent most of the night talking about how he wanted to support these hard-working women while openly ogling the dancers. He even tried to pull me into conversations with them, introducing me as his amazing friend and encouraging me to tip them like we were some sort of couple on a kinky date night. By the time we left, I was ready to call it a night and Uber home, but he insisted on driving. That's when I realized he'd been drinking a lot. He climbed into his convertible, revved the engine like he was auditioning for a Fast and Furious movie, and took off at what felt like warp speed. I spent the entire ride gripping the door handle and praying we wouldn't get pulled over, or worse, crash. To make matters even more horrifying, he was also messaging other women on the dating app while driving. He even turned his phone toward me at one point to show off a particularly flirty exchange, laughing about how in demand he was. By the time we pulled up outside my place, I was mentally and emotionally drained. I was ready to get out of the car and erase the night from my memory entirely, but he wasn't done. He leaned over, flashed me this cocky grin, and said, "So I'll be hearing from you again? Because I'm such a cool guy and dates with me are the best." I just nodded, said something vague about how we should totally hang out again, and bolted inside before he could say another word. Once I locked the door, I blocked his number and deleted the app. He was in the military. Canadian, to be specific. The kind of guy who carries himself like a coiled spring, ready to snap into action at the slightest provocation. Short hair, square jaw, boots so polished you could probably see your sins reflected back at you if you looked too long. We were at some dive bar, sticky floors, dim lights, a jukebox struggling through old rock ballads, and he was nursing what looked like his third or fourth whiskey. I didn't know him well. Barely at all, really. A friend of a friend, someone who tagged along because nobody wanted to be the jerk who told him he couldn't. I figured I'd make small talk, break the ice, maybe get a war story out of him, something gritty and heroic. People love those, don't they? The tales of sacrifice and bravery. The kind of stuff that makes you feel small but inspired, like you should be out there doing something bigger than yourself. So I asked casually if he'd ever done any volunteer work overseas with the military. Maybe built a school, handed out food, dug wells. You know, the heartwarming stuff that gets turned into documentaries with sweeping soundtracks. He didn't even hesitate. Didn't blink. Just stared straight at me with eyes that had seen things I didn't want to know about, and said, "And oh, I joined the military to kill people, not to help people." I laughed, because what else can you do in a moment like that? But it wasn't the kind of laugh that bubbles up naturally. It was nervous and hollow, the sound you make when you realize you're suddenly out of your depth. He didn't laugh back, didn't even crack a smile, just went back to his drink like the conversation was already over. I drained my beer faster than I should have, muttered something about needing to hit the restroom, and got out of there. Didn't look back, didn't even say goodbye. But here's the thing, the part one couldn't shake afterward. It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. Calm, flat, like he was stating a fact as obvious as the weather. And maybe for him it was, maybe he'd made peace with that part of himself in a way I never could. I spent the rest of the night wondering what kind of life gets you there. What kind of choices lead you to a place where helping people isn't even on your radar anymore? Where it's just about survival and winning and making sure the other guy doesn't get back up. And yet, there was something disturbingly honest about it. No pretense, no sugarcoating, just raw, unfiltered truth. I hated it, but I respected it too. It's been a while since that night, and I still think about him sometimes. Not in a fond way, but in that gnawing, unsettled way that makes you question things you thought you knew. About people, about the world, about yourself. Because the truth is, we all like to pretend we're better than we are. Kinder, more selfless. But given the right circumstances, the right pressures, who's to say we wouldn't end up just like him? Hardened, practical, focused solely on survival. He didn't scare me because he was a monster. He scared me because he wasn't. He was just a man, and that somehow made it worse. Said I was short, joking about something. 5 feet 2 inches, and he started to argue with me that I wasn't as we got out of the car. He's 6 foot something, grabbed me, picked me up, slammed me on the parking lot, and held me down until I said I wasn't short. I was so flabbergasted that I was speechless for several seconds, and then said whatever. It was my first ever date thing, and we had ridden in his car, so I wasn't entirely sure what to do. I was 16. We went into the damn Chick-fil-A, and after we sat, he started talking about how he could force me to feel specific emotions using his mind. He wouldn't shut up about the old crush he had on a girl who used to be my friend. I rushed everything so he would take me home. On the way home, he takes a weird turn down a road that leads to a dark spot covered by a bridge. My stomach dropped. I tried to discreetly open the car door, but found out it had child locks on, so I was stuck. My heart pounded so loud I thought he might hear it. He started to take his seat belt off and lean over, and for the first time that night, I thought I might not make it home. But then a miracle. A car showed up behind us, headlights cutting through the dark. He grumbled under his breath, frustrated, and finally started the car back up. He took me home. No words, no apologies, just a ride in suffocating silence. I went inside, locked the door, and sat in my room shaking for what felt like hours. I didn't cry. I didn't even know how I felt. But I knew one thing for sure. That was never happening again. The very next day, I went to school and warned my friends, especially my ex-friend. We all agreed we hated Patrick. That wasn't just a bad date. That was a warning wrapped in flesh and bad intentions. It took me years to even think about dating again. His shadow lingered in ways I didn't realize until much later. Every time I met someone new, I double-checked the locks, memorized exit routes, and always drove myself. I didn't even get in a car with a guy until I was 20. By then, I'd built enough armor to feel safe, or at least safer. Thankfully, life didn't leave me stuck in that night. At 20, I met someone who made me laugh instead of flinch. Someone who asked if I was okay instead of telling me how to feel. Someone who saw me, not just my height, not just what they wanted me to be. And we've been together for 15 years now. Both short, both a little sarcastic, both carrying our own baggage but never adding to each other's load. He gets it. He gets me. And every time he reaches for my hand, I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.